City Beneath the Ice. Chapter 2. Judgment. In the first 48 hours after the transmission, the world held its breath. The pulse that rose from the Antarctic pyramid came not with fury, but with restraint. No satellites fell, no grids collapsed. Children played, planes landed, markets opened, and satellites still beamed weather forecasts into living rooms. To most of humanity, nothing had changed. But in war rooms, command bunkers, and encrypted feeds, everything had changed. The broadcast had been received not through technology, but through mind, a vision, shared across borders, ranks, beliefs. A vision of Earth split in two, one half lush and blooming, the other reduced to ash. The interpretation varied. For some it was a warning, for others a threat, and to a select few it was a challenge. At the Pentagon, General Harlan Briggs stood before a cold blue table illuminated by 3D projections. He was not a man who scared easily. Decorated, calculating, and twice wounded in combat, he had built a career on anticipating escalation. He didn't like waiting, and what gnawed at him now wasn't the transmission, it was the silence that followed it. "They haven't asked for surrender, they haven't stated demands," he said, voice like steel scraping steel. "They want us to show our hand. Well, I say we show it." President Nelady Koza, patched in via secure line from Johannesburg, was unconvinced. "General, every civilian system is still functional. They haven't shut down our satellites. No one's died. They could have ended us already. They want to paralyze us with fear," he growled. "This is psychological warfare. You don't wait for an invading force to finish studying you. You strike while you still have teeth." In Moscow, a similar conversation was unfolding. Marshal Anatoly Volchenkov had convened his defense council in secrecy beneath the Kremlin's reinforced archives. "If we do nothing," he warned, "the Americans will act first. If the Americans act, they'll escalate it for all of us." And so, nearly in tandem, unspoken but synchronized by fear and ego, three world powers began to prepare. Under the ice, the architects watched. Above the Pacific, a squadron of U.S. stealth bombers refueled mid-air, receiving encrypted strike packages targeting the Antarctic anomaly. Submarines shifted into launch positions beneath the waves. Nuclear silos entered standby, and yet everything still worked. There were no failures, no interference, only the ever-present hum of readiness. At 0800 UTC, final orders were issued. Missiles were keyed in, firing crews entered sequences, aircraft banked toward the South Pole with payloads of smart ordnance, and in one echoing moment across multiple continents, launch confirmations were issued. And nothing happened. On every screen, systems turned green, then flatlined, not with sparks or explosions, with silence, as if a wire had been cut not from outside but from within. In Colorado, a silo commander blinked in disbelief. "We're reading go on all telemetry, but there's no ignition. Guidance is intact, power levels are full, but the missiles won't lift." On a nuclear sub beneath the Arctic, a Russian officer keyed in the launch override 6 times before looking up, his voice small. "The warheads are offline." In the South China Sea, the deck of a Chinese missile cruiser echoed with alarms as its guidance systems entered an unsolvable loop. Technicians scrambled, weapons reset themselves, then deactivated again, as if refusing to obey. High above Antarctica, 3 stealth bombers lost control at once. Their engines choked, not catastrophically, but decisively. Power failed, control yokes locked. One pilot managed to eject just before his plane glided helplessly into the endless white. Fighter jets across NATO fleets dropped from the skies. Systems not destroyed, merely made inert. Air bases went radio silent. Submarines were forced to surface, unable to dive or hide. Onboard weapons no longer responded to commands, no matter the override. And everywhere, the same realization bloomed in the minds of soldiers, technicians, admirals. We are not in control anymore. All around the world, within seconds of the failed strikes, a strange stillness settled into every command center. Not from relief, not from surrender, from disbelief. Missiles had not exploded on the launch pads. Systems had not been hacked, jammed, or destroyed. Everything was still there, functional, powered, and pristine. But the moment humanity attempted to use those systems for harm, the will to function vanished from the machines themselves, as if the weapons had decided not to play. In the control room of an Israeli Iron Dome defense grid, an officer dropped his headset and stared blankly at the screen. "The system has arms," he said numbly, "but no fists. It won't fire." In a French naval cruiser on the Atlantic, engineers attempted to reset targeting arrays only to watch, horrified, as their interface simply erased itself. Aboard the USS Sentinel, a nuclear sub off the Indian coast, Captain Angela Markham was the first to say it aloud. "We've been disarmed." Back in Geneva, President Koza's voice trembled slightly as she addressed the remaining members of the Emergency Response Council. "They didn't disable Earth. They only disabled our ability to destroy." Her eyes flicked to the glowing world map on the wall behind her, now unmarked by missile paths or impact zones. "They're not silencing our voices. They're silencing our violence." No civilians had died, no cities were burning. In Paris, cafes still opened at dawn. In Nairobi, street vendors still lit their morning fires. In Shanghai, stock tickers still moved, confused but unbroken. Humanity's system still functioned, only its weapons had failed. And now, the warriors of the world were left staring at their empty holsters. For many, there was confusion. For others, shame. In Brazil, General Helder Santana deactivated the national missile grid with trembling fingers and turned to the press corps outside the bunker. "We were given a chance to listen. We tried to shout instead, and they took our voice." In a NATO compound in Brussels, a tech sergeant sat alone at his station, scrolling back through the logs of the failed strike. He whispered, not to anyone in particular, "It's like they know who we are, and they're disappointed." In the Kremlin, Marshal Volchenkov broke his silence at last. "They didn't punish us. They refused to let us punish ourselves." All across the military-industrial world, an unprecedented silence fell. Not a tactical ceasefire, but a spiritual one. A reckoning of intention, the kind that rarely comes with war, but always follows hubris. And beneath the frozen surface of Antarctica, the architects watched without judgment, without wrath, only waiting. Claire stood at the edge of the awakening chamber, still surrounded by glyphs that pulsed in time with something vast and ancient. She had not seen what the military had tried, but she could feel it through the pyramid's resonance, a sense of halted fury. The vibrations were different now, quieter, sharper. "They tried to fight," Yan whispered beside her, staring at a console lit with spiraling code. "And the weapons simply refused." Lucas looked toward the center of the pyramid, where the great crystalline data node now hovered in perfect suspension. "It wasn't sabotage. It was judgment." Claire stepped forward, her voice low. "Not judgment in anger, judgment in disappointment." Outside, far above the ice, the snow still fell, gentle, untouched, and for the first time in the long memory of Earth's militaries, not a single gun fired. Not because they chose peace, but because something older had chosen it for them, and the world, for the first time in its violent history, had been paused. The fall didn't begin with explosions. It began with a pause, a half-second delay between keystrokes and response, a hiccup in a financial algorithm, a satellite realigning slightly off course. Individually, these were nothing. Together, they were the signal. The world's nervous system was being unwoven, thread by thread. The architects didn't sever the cord all at once. They allowed humanity to feel the unraveling. At first, people thought it was coincidence, a systems glitch, a cyber attack, but then the redundancy systems failed, one after the other. Not in chaos, but in sequence. In New York, the stock exchange monitors froze mid-ticker. Analysts blinked at unmoving graphs. Data feeds ceased. Not scrambled, not deleted, just gone. Entire cloud servers stopped responding. The internet, still glowing on screens, no longer transmitted anything new, like a painting of itself. In Tokyo, bullet trains coasted to graceful halts. Their guidance software refused to re-engage. Traffic signals flickered and held yellow, unchanging. Drones hovered, paused in mid-delivery, then slowly descended to the ground as if fatigued. In Beijing, an artificial weather system designed to seed rain fell silent. The towers of the central monitoring grid, previously humming with activity, stood mute. Technicians tapped their tablets. Nothing responded. Overnight, Earth's wireless web dimmed. By the second day, GPS satellites stopped syncing, bank systems froze, cryptocurrency wallets became inaccessible, not hacked, simply unreachable. Surveillance feeds turned to static. The digital heartbeat of civilization skipped, then stalled. And yet, homes still had power, lights still came on, elevators still worked. The collapse wasn't physical, it was informational, it was a severing of coordination. In a hospital in Berlin, a surgeon paused mid-separation as their AI assist software flickered and reset. The tools still functioned, but guidance protocols had been wiped. The doctor looked to the human nurse beside them and nodded. "Manual," they said, voice steadier than they felt. "We go manual." In a village in Kenya, water pumps continued to run. Radios continued to hum. But across the plains, there was no signal, no news, no chatter from the outside world, just silence. A strange calm began to settle across the globe, because for the first time in over a century, no one knew what was happening anywhere else. The global mind had gone quiet. Elsewhere, in the International Space Station, Commander Elaine Martin floated weightlessly, staring down at the Earth below. Her telemetry feed had died hours ago. Her voice crackled into emptiness each time she tried to hail Houston. She wasn't afraid, not yet. But the silence, it felt like standing inside a cathedral. Her Russian counterpart, Yevgeny, drifted beside her, face pale. "It's as if they pulled the plug on the planet," he whispered. "They didn't pull it," she replied. "They unplugged us from each other." On the surface, humanity still breathed, still walked, still ate. But the connective tissue of progress, data, code, command, had dissolved. The world hadn't collapsed. It had been unified in isolation. In Geneva, President Koza stood before a room of stunned ambassadors, the emergency council now reduced to candlelight and handwritten notes. "This is no longer about warfare," she said. "This is about dependency. We built a civilization of systems, stacked on systems, and now we see the truth. We forgot how to live without them." A hush passed over the room. Someone in the back wept quietly. At NORAD, soldiers stood beside dead consoles, watching radar screens that no longer blinked. One technician whispered, "It's like we're ghosts in a museum of the future." And deep beneath Antarctica, within the humming pyramid, the architects stood motionless. Claire moved through the now active corridors, passing walls that shimmered with moving glyphs, ancient data flowing like rivers of light. She could hear it, feel it, the great silence above. Like the air had changed, like earth itself had gone still to listen. Lucas appeared beside her, eyes fixed on a wall covered in star-like fractals. "They're not punishing us," he murmured. "They're rebalancing us. They've watched us build a world where a few controlled the many, where empathy couldn't scale, so they're stripping it back, resetting us to flesh and firelight." Jan's voice crackled through the chamber comm. "They're leaving enough. Power grids, agriculture, medicine. They're not trying to erase humanity, just its hubris." Claire ran her fingers along a glowing column. "We're being given a chance to feel the disconnection, to remember what it means to be present, vulnerable, local." Above, in the empty control towers, on the silent city streets, in the grounded airports and abandoned command centers, Earth's people slowly emerged from the shadow of speed. For the first time in living memory, the world wasn't being driven. It was waiting, and the question hummed beneath every breath, in every mind: what will we become when the noise is gone? The pulse began with no warning, no sound, no light, no shift in the earth, just a feeling, an invisible gravity that seemed to tug at the center of the soul. Claire felt it first, standing in the resonance chamber of the pyramid, her hand lightly touching the smooth, humming console. Her vision narrowed. The glyphs on the wall pulsed once, then froze mid-amination. Then she staggered as if struck, though no force had touched her. In that instant, something inside her unspooled. Memories, not images, not thoughts, moments. Holding her mother's hand in a hospital room at age 9, the time she lied to a student to preserve their confidence, the night she walked away from a colleague crying in the hallway, choosing silence over comfort. Each memory unfolded not just as a replay, but as a mirror, a full sensory reflection of who she had been in that instant, not how she remembered it, but how she truly was. Lucas dropped to one knee, gasping, "Something's in me. I can feel it digging through everything." All across the world, people began to stagger, sway, fall to the ground, overcome not by violence but by vision. The pulse had gone global, from the tip of Patagonia to the frozen archipelagos of the north, from the spires of Dubai to the slums of Kolkata. The signal reached everyone. It was not filtered by wealth, or by faith, or by status. It asked only one question: what lives beneath your mask? In the back alleys of Cairo, a thief clutched his chest, not in pain, but in revelation. A memory of the child he once saved from a burning car flared inside him like a flare, small, defiant. In a boardroom in Manhattan, a billionaire stared ahead blankly, his breath frozen in his throat. The stock manipulations, the layoffs, the casual cruelty, each floated before his eyes not as crimes, but as truths. Unadorned, unjustified, his identity unraveling in real time. In a rainforest village, a midwife who had never left her valley sat peacefully in the dirt, eyes open, smiling through tears. She saw her entire life as a weave of choices, and in every thread, compassion had triumphed. On a warship drifting powerless in the Indian Ocean, a young soldier cried out, fists clenched at his sides. The faces of those he had shot came back to him, not with judgment, but clarity. The fear in their eyes, his own disbelief at the orders he followed. He fell to his knees. It was not death that the pulse brought, it was exposure, a revealing of essence. The algorithm of judgment had begun, and it did not tally crimes, it measured alignment. The architects did not care who had made mistakes. They cared what ruled the heart when the choice was hardest. Some tried to resist. They screamed, they hid, they drank, they prayed, but there was no escape from what lived inside. Those who carried hate in their marrow, who built their identity on cruelty, who had long since buried empathy beneath power, they were the first to fall. Not in agony, not in fire. They simply ceased. In an underground bunker in Nevada, a man known only to his people as the architect of strategy vanished as his assistant turned to ask him a question. One moment he was there, the next he was ash on his leather chair. In a villa in the Swiss Alps, a pharmaceutical magnate who had hidden life-saving drugs for profit collapsed mid-sentence, mid-laugh. His body did not slump. It dissolved, his wine glass falling to a floor no longer meant to bear him. It spread in waves, measured, selective, unstoppable. In the hours that followed, the world grew quieter. Cities did not burn, power grids did not fail, skyscrapers still stood against the wind, but the spaces between people had changed. Subways ran on time, but fewer passengers waited. Elevators opened to half-empty floors. Park benches sat untouched by those who once claimed them with anger or disdain. The dissonant had vanished, and only those whose hearts had retained some ember of empathy remained to notice. Claire stood in the chamber, eyes wide, tears tracing slow paths down her cheeks. She could still feel the residue of the pulse like a truth pressed against the inside of her skull, humming softly, the knowledge of how close she'd come to dissolution, how the parts of her she'd never forgiven had nearly outweighed the ones she had. Lucas sat on the floor with his head in his hands, not sobbing, but breathing slowly, like someone who had just returned from drowning. Yan knelt beside the architect's console, her fingers trailing the glyphs. "It wasn't perfect people who survived," she whispered. "It was honest ones." In a temple in Istanbul, a priest who had lost his faith 20 years ago knelt beneath a broken stained glass window and whispered thanks, not for survival, but for clarity. In Lagos, a school teacher walked through the neighborhood she had taught in for decades, noting the silent houses, the doors that no longer opened. She stood beside a crying child and took their hand without words. In a prison in Siberia, the guards were gone, but the inmates, those who had shared bread, protected the weak, tended the sick, remained. One by one, they opened the gates and stepped into the snow. The earth was not empty, it was lighter. Above, in orbit, Commander Elaine Martin floated by the window of the ISS, watching Earth spin beneath her like a sleeping giant. She didn't know what had happened, she only knew her crew had shrunk by 2, and that she now felt less alone than she ever had. In Geneva, President Koza addressed the world with pen and paper and camera drone. "There are fewer of us," she said, "but not lesser. The architects did not erase us, they revealed us. They forced us to witness ourselves, not as nations, but as souls." At the edge of a dry canyon in Australia, an Aboriginal elder drew ancient symbols in the sand, nodding as if this was a story he had always known would return. Beneath the ice, the architect stepped forward. Claire could hear them, not through sound, but through resonance, like an emotional chord plucked in her core. The convener stood at the apex of the amphitheater, its mirrored face reflecting only light. "The algorithm has passed," its voice whispered through her bones. "Your pattern is incomplete, but it continues." She stepped forward, barefoot now, armorless, unafraid. "You didn't destroy us," she said. "We do not destroy," the convener replied. "We reveal. You chose, and were chosen." Claire turned slowly, facing the projection of Earth on the chamber's ceiling, rotating silently, now etched with faint light lines, population shifts, psychic echoes, harmonics of loss and grace. The damage was done, the worst had passed, and now the world had been woken. "This isn't the end," she said quietly. "No," the architects answered. "This is calibration." All around her the lights dimmed, the air settled, the pyramids stilled, and across Earth, those who remained, turned inward and began, for the first time, to truly see each other. They emerged into a quieter world. No sirens, no horns, no breaking news, only wind, birds, the sound of shoes on old pavement, and breathing, so much breathing, shaky, shallow, relieved. What remained of humanity stepped blinking into the stillness like survivors of a fire they hadn't seen ignite, only felt its heat as it passed through them. In the first hours, no one knew what to say. Many stood in their doorways or on balconies, looking out at streets that no longer moved like they used to. Some wept. Others waited, expecting the quiet to be broken by tanks, alarms, the voice of government or God. But nothing came, because the voice had already spoken. Claire stood on the icy ledge of the Great Pyramid's entrance, eyes scanning the skyline of the buried city. It no longer pulsed with menace. The lights were steady now, breathing, alive. Behind her, Jan stood wordlessly, watching a thin stream of warm air rise from the chamber vents. The temperature had increased. Their suits, once needed, now felt excessive. Lucas emerged last, carrying only a field notebook and a stunned look in his eyes. He stopped beside Claire. "Can we even call this survival?" he asked. "This feels like something else." And it was. Because it wasn't just that people were gone. It was that those who remained had changed. Across the world, survivors looked into mirrors and saw themselves as they once had been. The arthritis was gone, the tremors, the tumors. Even scars had vanished from skin as if rewritten. An old man in Buenos Aires stepped outside his apartment for the first time in years, walking without a cane, his back straight and eyes bright. In Seoul, a woman who had lived with cystic fibrosis for 3 decades stood on her rooftop, drawing a full breath, her first in memory, and sobbed as the air filled her lungs. In Nairobi, a child born without sight opened her eyes and screamed, not from fear but from color. Her mother held her close, both of them laughing and weeping all at once. It wasn't a reward, it was a message. You were not spared to suffer, you were spared to choose. But that choice would not come easily. In the empty plazas and quiet halls, people began to gather, not in riots, but in circles. They shared what they had seen during the pulse, their worst moments, their redemptions, their failures. For the first time in history, humanity was confessing to itself. On a hill in Cape Town, survivors knelt and lit candles for those who were gone, but there were no names to read, no bodies to bury, only absence and memory. At a mosque in Istanbul, an imam embraced a rabbi and a Buddhist monk. None of them spoke. They simply sat together beneath the rising sun. In a refugee camp turned sanctuary near Cairo, an elderly woman rose to her feet, arthritis gone, spine straight, and began to teach the children how to write with sticks in the dust. Claire walked through the residence halls alone. Every step echoed. The city had changed. Doors opened more easily now. The corridors no longer whispered warnings. They hummed gently, like a home waking up. At the far end of a grand circular chamber, a great table had emerged from the floor. Glyphs hovered above it, symbols not of power, but of invitation. Yan entered beside her, eyes wide. "They're not done," she said. Claire nodded. "No, they've cleared the noise. Now they want our answer." On the walls, glyphs shimmered into a new shape, a choice offered. Not an ultimatum, not a command, an invitation. The chamber lit itself as they entered, but the light was not harsh or sterile. It was soft, almost warm, like sunlight filtered through deep water. It emanated from the walls, from the floor, from the very air. A resonance, like the city was not merely illuminating their path, but acknowledging their arrival. The table before them was smooth, circular, alive with shifting glyphs and refracted light. Around it 11 narrow columns glowed, one for each continent, even those now sparsely inhabited. In the center, a single hovering orb, its surface rippling like liquid metal suspended in gravity's absence. Lucas circled it slowly, his voice hushed. "It's a quorum platform, a council space. They've built us a seat at the table. They want to talk," Jan whispered. "But not with all of us. Just someone." Claire felt it before the word came, a warmth in her chest. Not burning, beckoning. The orb turned gently toward her, aligning with her heart. The glyphs shifted. The table pulsed once with golden blue light. And then her name, not spoken aloud, not written in letters, but expressed through everything she had ever been, pressed into form. Claire, chosen. She stepped forward on legs that felt too light, too strong, too fragile. Her fingers hovered over the orb. It responded before she touched it, peeling open like a flower of light. Inside it was not information, it was knowing. The architects did not speak in syllables or syntax. They spoke in synthesis. Images. Music without sound. Emotion without pain. A wave of understanding crashed into her, and she did not flinch. They showed her Earth as it had been, as it was, as it could be. Not a utopia, but a beginning. Cities rebuilt, not in concrete, but in crystal. Not for profit, but for people. Food shared across cultures. Knowledge flowing freely. Children learning from archives older than the stars. But also the danger of forgetting, of sliding backward. "This offer is not forever," the resonance said within her. "It is a path, not a promise." Claire turned slowly to her team. Lucas looked stunned but proud. Jan's eyes gleamed with tears. Rains stood in the background, silent but did not stop her. "They're giving us a second chance," Claire said aloud, her voice trembling. "Not by restoring what we had, but by asking if we want something better." Outside the pyramid, the skies above Antarctica began to shimmer faintly, like a global aurora flickering just beneath the atmosphere. Not a warning, a signal. Across the planet, surviving humans looked up. Some reached out their hands, some dropped to their knees, most simply watched, breath held. Above them, the sky did not speak, but the silence carried a message. You are being given this world again, and this time it will be shaped not by those who took, but by those who chose to stay. Claire turned back to the orb. "I accept," she said, voice steady. "I speak for Earth." The orb dissolved in a silent flash of light, and the city beneath the ice hummed with new purpose. Far above, around the curve of the Earth, quiet signals began to pulse. Teleportation beacons embedded across every continent. The next phase had begun. But the architects said no more. Their silence would now be the test. And for the first time in history, Earth stood, truly alone. But not without hope.